For 2 seconds, Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X locked eyes across the room. No words, no movement. Just silence. Two men who understood everything without saying a thing. It was February 21st, 1965, the Audubon Ballroom. Thomas Hagen was rising to his feet, a shotgun slowly revealing itself from under his coat. 400 people in the room. Not one of them knew what was coming. But Bumpy did. He stood 10 feet behind Hagen. His hand was already on the grip, finger brushing the trigger. One shot, one man down. Malcolm would live. But that's when Malcolm turned, saw Bumpy, saw the weapon, and saw the moment that was about to unfold. He gave a small shake of his head. Then smiled. Bumpy's eyes dropped. A little girl stood between them. Brown dress, pigtails, no older than 6. She had slipped from her father's lap, climbed up onto a chair, leaned forward into the aisle. Directly into the line of fire. If Bumpy fired now, the shot would go through her before ever reaching its mark. He froze, looked back up. Malcolm mouthed 3 words. "I die standing." 2 seconds later, the blast echoed through the ballroom. Bumpy Johnson didn't save Malcolm X that day. But what he did next, in the next 15 seconds, is the reason. The shooter never got away to understand what happened that Sunday. You have to go back 3 days earlier, February 14th, 1965, Valentine's Day, 2:46. Malcolm X's home in Queens went up in flames. A firebomb tossed through the bedroom window. His wife Betty and their 4 daughters, the oldest only 6, barely made it out. Standing in the freezing street in nightgowns, crying, shaken, covered in smoke, they watched their home burn to the ground. Malcolm knew who was behind it. The same group he had once called brothers. The Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad's inner circle. They wanted him gone for leaving, for speaking out, for exposing the secrets they wanted buried. The next morning, Bumpy Johnson showed up at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. No phone call. No warning. Just walked in, early, dressed sharp as ever. He found Malcolm sitting in the waiting room while the doctors checked on the girls. Bumpy sat next to him. Said nothing at first. Then quietly, "Give me 48 hours. The men who did this won't make it to Wednesday." Malcolm stared down at the floor, drained and broken. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but worn. "If you do that, then I become what they say I am. A man hiding behind someone else's gun. I'd be alive, but everything I've preached would be gone." He looked at Bumpy. "I've spent 10 years telling people that violence leads to more violence. I can't walk away from that now just because I'm scared." Bumpy clenched his jaw. "This ain't about speeches. It's about your wife. Your kids. They could have died last night. I know." Malcolm's voice cracked. "But if I let you fight this for me, I lose everything. And that's the cycle I'm trying to stop." Bumpy didn't like the answer, but he respected it. "Then let me protect you. My best guys every hour armed." Malcolm shook his head. "You know I'm not walking away from this, right?" "Yeah," Bumpy said. Malcolm offered his hand. "But I'll die clean. I'll die standing." Bumpy took his hand. Held it. Didn't say another word. "They won't get away with it." "I know," Malcolm said quietly. "But don't do it for me. I've made my peace." At the door, Bumpy paused. 3 days, Malcolm. I'm giving you 3 days to change your mind." Malcolm smiled gently. "I won't." 3 days later, on Saturday night, Bumpy's phone rang. It was 2:47 a.m. The voice on the other end was a nervous 19-year-old named Jerome, a busboy working the graveyard shift at a diner off Malcolm X Boulevard. Jerome had grown up just 3 blocks from Bumpy's building. And like many young men in Harlem, he knew exactly who to call when something felt off. Mr. Johnson. Jerome's voice trembled. 3 men just left my diner. Corner booth. They were talking about handling the preacher problem. They mentioned tomorrow. Mentioned the Audubon. Mentioned shotguns. Bumpy sat upright. Did you get names? One of them, they called him Hagen, Thomas Hagen. Bumpy closed his eyes. That name he knew. A name whispered in dark corners. A man from the Nation of Islam's inner circle. Focused. Cold. The kind who saw what he was doing as something righteous. You did good, Jerome. Real good. Now forget you heard anything. Bumpy hung up and called Malcolm. No answer. He reached out through every channel he had. Nothing came back. So on Sunday, February 21st, Bumpy Johnson did something he rarely did. He broke his own rules. And he went alone. At 2:15 p.m., the Audubon Ballroom was already filling up. Over 400 people, families, students, elders who'd known Malcolm back in the day, and young men who saw in him a new voice for change. Bumpy walked in wearing his usual dark suit. Nothing flashy. He never needed flash. Power followed him without it. He didn't head to the back rows. He moved into the crowd, steady and unnoticed, positioning himself next to a pillar on the left side, 5th row. Good view, clear exits. Always thinking, he scanned the crowd. Most faces were familiar, loyal, but 3 men didn't fit. Front section. Spread out, 2 rows apart, still, focused, uninterested in the opening remarks. Just waiting. The one in the center, 3rd row, was Thomas Hagen. Bumpy recognized the look in his eyes. Calm, settled, like the moment was already decided. Bumpy's hand moved under his jacket. Finding the grip of his .38, he could act now. Walk up the aisle, 2 quick shots, take down Hagen and his backup. But with a full crowd, panic would spread like wildfire. People would run. Someone could get hurt. And even if Bumpy stopped today's plan, tomorrow would still come. You don't stop a movement like this with one move. These weren't just men. They were part of something deeper. So Bumpy waited. At 2:40 p.m., the moderator's voice rose over the noise. Brothers and sisters, I present to you Malcolm X. The room rose to its feet. Applause erupted. Malcolm stepped out in a simple dark suit. No guards, no shield. Just him, a man with a message. He raised his hands. The room quieted. Assalamu alaikum, Malcolm said. Walaikum assalam, the crowd responded. Bumpy's eyes stayed locked on Hagen. He watched the man lean forward, watched his hand dip into his coat. Then came the distraction. A voice in the center row shouted, "Get your hand out of my pocket." What's wrong with you? Classic. Loud enough to turn heads. Sharp enough to split attention. And it worked. In that ripple of confusion, Thomas Hagen stood. His coat swung open. The weapon was visible, compact, meant for close range. No words, just movement. Bumpy was already in motion. His revolver halfway drawn, finger steady. 10 feet away. Clear line. A shot he could make. Then he saw her, a little girl. White ribbons in her pigtails. In the chaos, she had stood on her chair, turning to look behind her. Right in Bumpy's line of sight, his jaw clenched. He stepped to the left. People blocked him. Tried the right, same thing. Too many bodies. Not enough space. That's when Malcolm turned. Not toward Hagen, toward Bumpy, as if he knew. As if he had always known Bumpy would be there. For 2 seconds that felt like forever, their eyes locked. In that stillness, Malcolm understood it all. The weapon in Bumpy's hand. The storm behind his friend's calm face. The impossible math he was doing in his head. Malcolm saw the girl, brown Sunday dress, still and unaware, between them. He knew what was being asked without a word. A question no one should have to answer. Is my life worth hers? Malcolm had preached for years that no life was greater than another, that children were sacred, that justice couldn't be built on fear or vengeance, that the road mattered as much as the destination. Now, all of that had to be proven. Not in a sermon, not on a stage, but right here in a choice. And so, Malcolm gave Bumpy his answer. The only answer a man like him could give. He shook his head. Slowly, deliberately. Then he smiled, not with fear, not with panic, but with calm acceptance, and silently formed 3 words. I die standing. Bumpy's finger locked in place on the trigger. Suddenly, the man in front of him shifted, completely blocking his view. Bumpy pushed forward, trying to see past him. Boom! The shotgun blast tore through the room. When Bumpy's sightline cleared, Malcolm was staggering backward, dark spreading across his chest. He fought to stay upright, struggled to remain standing, but then 2 more men rushed the stage. Pistols out, firing again and again. 16 bullets struck Malcolm X. He collapsed. And Bumpy Johnson, the man who had stood up to Dutch Schultz, who had faced the Italian mafia, who had ended lives without hesitation for 3 decades, stood frozen, gun in hand, unable to save the one man who mattered most. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Screams filled the air. People dropped to the floor. Mothers threw themselves over their children. Thomas Hagen turned and sprinted for the exit, shotgun still in his hands. Smoke drifting from the barrel. Something inside Bumpy broke, not loudly, not violently, but coldly, precisely. He moved with purpose. He couldn't fire. Too many people. Too much panic. One shot could hit the wrong person. So he ran. 15 feet. 10, 5. Hagen was almost at the door. Seconds from escape. Bumpy lunged low, swept forward, and hooked Hagen's ankle with perfect timing. Hagen's body kept moving, but his feet went out from under him. He slammed face first onto the polished floor. The shotgun flew free, skidding across the wood. Bumpy kicked it hard, sending it under overturned chairs. Gone. Hagen scrambled up, panicked, reaching for the pistol at his waist. Bumpy grabbed his wrist and twisted. The small gun clattered away. Then Bumpy did the unexpected. He didn't kill Hagen, didn't strike him, didn't pull his own weapon. It wasn't mercy. It never was. If Bumpy fired, he'd be the only one standing with a gun when the police arrived. It would turn Malcolm's death into a gangland story. He couldn't allow that. Malcolm's message mattered more than revenge, and dead men don't talk. Hagen needed to speak, to name who planned it, who approved it, who believed it was justified. Most of all, this man took Malcolm from the people. So Bumpy was going to give him back to them. He grabbed Hagen by the collar, yanked him upright, then shoved him hard into the crowd. 20 men surged forward. They had just watched Malcolm X fall, and now the man responsible was right in front of them. A fist struck Hagen's jaw. Then another. Hands grabbed, pulled, dragged him down. Bumpy stepped back. Let it happen. Let the people deliver the justice the system wouldn't. He leaned in close, voice steady but firm. Don't let him run. Make him answer. They understood. Hagen was pinned to the floor, held down, unable to move. Sirens echoed outside, growing louder. Bumpy Johnson walked calmly toward the side exit. Past the noise, past the tears, past the smoke still hanging in the air. By the time police rushed through the front doors, Bumpy was already 3 blocks away, fading into the streets of Harlem like he had never been there. Behind him, Thomas Hagen lay beaten but alive. Alive to stand trial. Alive to spend the rest of his life knowing he failed. Knowing Malcolm X died standing. Knowing Harlem never forgets. Malcolm X was pronounced dead at Columbia Presbyterian. Hospital at 3:30 p.m., 16 gunshot wounds. 39 years old, gone. Bumpy didn't go to the hospital. Too many questions. Too many eyes. Instead, he went somewhere he hadn't been in years. Steve Phillips Church. Small, quiet, empty that Sunday evening. He sat in the last pew, alone, still wearing the jacket stained with Malcolm's blood. An hour later, Father Callahan found him there. "You don't usually come here," the priest said gently. "No," Bumpy replied, "but I needed to be." They sat in silence. "I was 10 feet away," Bumpy finally said. "Gun in my hand. I could have stopped it, but there was a little girl, 6 years old, right in the line of fire." The priest turned toward him. "So you chose the child's life over Malcolm's?" "No," Bumpy said, voice breaking. "Malcolm chose it. He saw me, saw the gun, and he told me to let him go." The priest nodded slowly. "Then you honored his choice." Bumpy stared at the cross above the altar. "I didn't save him," he said. "I gave him what he wanted." Bumpy's hands tightened into fists. "I could have moved, found another angle, done something. But I froze, and I watched him die." The priest said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "Malcolm X lived his entire life ready to die for what he believed. You didn't take that from him. You honored it. Honoring it doesn't bring him back." "No," Father Callahan said. "But Malcolm made his choice. He chose truth over safety, integrity over survival. He chose to die standing rather than live bowed. Not many men have that kind of strength." Bumpy rose slowly, buttoned his jacket over the dried blood. "Hagen's still alive," he said. "The crowd got to him, but he'll live. He'll stand trial. And the others?" Bumpy's face turned cold. "There were 3 shooters. Hagen's in custody. The other 2 ran. Will they get away?" "No." Bumpy's voice was ice. "They won't." The priest gave a knowing nod. "Vengeance won't fill this loss." "Maybe not," Bumpy replied, heading for the door. "But it's the only thing I have left to give him." Malcolm X's funeral took place on February 27th at Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. 3,000 mourners filled the church. Thousands more stood outside, lining the streets of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson stood in the back, not beside leaders, not near family, just in the shadows, leaning quietly against the wall. Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's widow, spotted him through the crowd. Their eyes met. She gave a small nod, sad, but clear. She knew. She knew Bumpy had been there. She knew he had tried. She knew Thomas Hagen was in custody because Bumpy made sure he didn't get far. After the service, Bumpy walked alone to Ferncliff Cemetery, the place where Malcolm would be laid to rest. He stood at the edge of the open grave, looking down at the simple coffin. From his coat pocket, he pulled something small, his straight razor, the one he'd carried for 3 decades, the one that made men cross the street when they saw him, the symbol of who he was, what he'd done, what he'd survived. He placed it gently on the coffin lid. "You died standing," Bumpy whispered. "Just like you wanted." He paused. "But the men who took you, they'll die scared. That's my promise." And Bumpy Johnson kept that promise. Within 6 months, the other 2 shooters, the ones who had vanished that day, were found. Not by police, not through courtrooms. By Harlem. By Bumpy's network, they never faced trial. They simply disappeared. The history books don't talk about that. They say Thomas Hagen was caught, convicted, that the others escaped. Justice. But anyone who lived in Harlem in 1965 will tell you a different story. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 3 years after Malcolm. Heart attack at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. No headlines. No sirens. Just an old soldier whose time had come. At his funeral, someone asked one of Bumpy's closest friends, what was Bumpy's greatest moment? The man thought for a while, then said, February 21st, 1965, when he sat in that ballroom, gun in hand, and respected Malcolm's choice, even though it broke him inside. That's when Bumpy proved he wasn't just a gangster. He was a man of honor. Bumpy Johnson had pulled the trigger for money, for respect, for survival. But on that Sunday afternoon, he made a different choice. He chose not to shoot. He chose to honor his friend's final wish. He let Malcolm X die on his feet, with dignity, on his own terms. That part isn't written in textbooks, but maybe it should be. Because sometimes the hardest thing a man with a gun can do is not pull the trigger. Sometimes the bravest thing a killer can do is let someone die. Malcolm X died standing. And Bumpy Johnson made sure the world would never forget that. If this story of honor, loyalty, and impossible choices moved you, hit that subscribe button, like the video, share it with someone who needs to understand what real strength looks like, and drop a comment below. Would you have pulled the trigger? Then hit the notification bell, because we've got more untold stories from the streets that made history.